The Cold War had been a turbulent time for many countries the world over, as the superpowers of the United States and Soviet Union meddled in or even invaded countries both big and small, all in the goal of tilting their chances in the global game for dominance. One of these countries was Chile in South America, where for years both the CIA and Soviet KGB had attempted to influence the outcome of elections in favor of their preferred candidates. When the Soviet candidate won, the US grew desperate to change the regime, and fortunately for them, the country would experience a crisis that allowed for an anti-communist leader to seize power, Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet would go on to become one of the foremost anti-communist figures in the Cold War, and utterly reshape the Chilean way of life. Yet despite this, Pinochet ultimately decided to step down following a referendum on his leadership, and since then Chile has gradually drifted back toward a more left-leaning path. But what if that changed? What if in an alternate timeline, Pinochet never stepped down? Hello audience, Mr. Z here with another alternate history scenario for you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We have videos like this every week, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who's donated to us on Patreon, Utreon, and right here on YouTube through channel memberships. Your donations really go a long way to keeping this channel going, and by donating to us across any of these platforms, you'll get access to some great perks including physical merch, a custom designed flag wallpaper, and access to an exclusive members-only Discord server where you can enter your scenarios for a chance to have them made into full videos. You can follow the pop-up on screen here, go to the comments section or description to visit any of these pages and support our channel, and of course you can do so by clicking the join button right below this video. If you can't donate anything, consider subscribing and sharing this video to help the channel out. Now, back to the video. The United States had initially supported generally moderate anti-communist figures, while continuously the Soviets placed their support behind one Salvador Allende, a moderate socialist who rallied together a wide coalition of Chile's left wing, from the center-left to the radical left, all with the goal of, in his own words, turning Chile into a socialist or even communist nation not by a revolution of violence, but by a revolution of democracy. This strategy was labeled the Chilean way to socialism, and while the Soviets and later Cubans were skeptical of the strategy, Soviet curiosity of the potential success of democratic socialism led them to remain strong supporters of Allende. Ultimately, Allende would win the election of 1970, and despite initial fears, did succeed in creating a brief period of prosperity where inflation shrunk, major industries were nationalized, wages rose, jobs were created, healthcare, education, and voting rights were expanded, the list goes on. However, this ambitious agenda soon crashed hard, as Allende's attempt to redistribute wealth through wage increases soon led to hyperinflation. The decreased value of Chilean currency led the public to ignore Allende's fixed prices on goods, shortages broke out, resource production decreased. Meanwhile, the United States, eager to weaken Allende's credibility, fanned the flames of the situation, leading to general strikes and widespread unrest. In response to this, Allende doubled down on his socialist policies and began seemingly preparing a violent alternative to a democratic revolution, refusing to enforce judicial decisions that compromised the Chilean left wing, attempting to consolidate control of the Chilean media, refusing to allow citizens to leave the country, illegally seizing private land, attempting to reorganize the police and armed forces, and enabling armed demonstrations by far-left groups while suppressing right-wing groups that did the same. All of this and more would lead the Chilean Congress to declare Allende to be in violation of the Constitution and attempting to establish a totalitarian regime. Ultimately, it was decided that the military would need to intervene to remove Allende from power, and at the head of the military was Commander-in-Chief Augusto Pinochet. Allende refused to surrender and ultimately died in the struggle. What immediately followed was military rule under a four-man junta which included Pinochet, before Pinochet was named perpetual executive while the junta assumed a legislative role. Pinochet's leadership was characterized by three main attributes. First was the suppression of dissident factions, namely communist and socialist elements, which he achieved through means of soft and hard power, from outlawing parties to executing militants and their sympathizers. Secondly was a purification and revival of traditional Chilean values as defined by statesman Diego Portales in particular. What this meant was neither an open democracy nor a monarchy. Both Pinochet and Portales had expressed the view that society was corrupted and that the average citizen was a slave to vice and degeneracy, and so only those of high moral character should be direct participants in the process of politics, a view not too dissimilar from that of the Federalists in the United States. It might even be argued that the ideologies of Pinochet and Portales are related to American federalism, sharing alongside its views of aristocratic democracy the concepts of a strong centralized government, unitary rule, and a mercantile economy. Third and finally is the matter of economics. Pinochet had been a strong proponent for global free markets, privatization, and deregulation. This neoliberal economic agenda brought him favor from fellow economic neoliberals like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Together, these policies brought about a period of GDP growth and social stability within Chile. However, internationally opposition to Pinochet's authoritarian leadership style was mounting. Much like in the case of South Africa, where apartheid was somewhat tolerated by the United States in the name of maintaining a check against communism, once the Cold War appeared to be coming to an end and the Soviet Union itself began opening up to the West, the United States and its allies in Europe largely abandoned their support for states which did not conform to the new Western standard of democracy and liberalism. Chile and many of the dictatorships of South America thus came into the crosshairs. Pressured, Pinochet would allow for the creation of political parties, and soon after that held a referendum on his remaining in office. In part due to a poor campaigning effort, Pinochet lost the referendum. But this time, things are different. If we assume Pinochet won the 1988 referendum for one reason or another, he would remain in office for another 8 years and the junta would be replaced by a newly elected Congress. Chile would be partially democratized, but Pinochet would have also been reassured that his path was in fact the path the public desired, and would continue to exercise dominance in political matters. It's quite possible that if Congress impeded his efforts, he would have used his military influence to curtail congressional authority or once again outlaw certain parties. One of Pinochet's proposals had been to secure a number of legislative seats exclusively for military officers, allowing for perpetual military influence within the government. Pinochet may have also sought to institute a prerequisite for military service to serve as president, so as to maintain military rule even after he retired. Now, of course, all of this would have left Pinochet as one of, if not the last right-wing dictator in all of South America, and potentially feeling vulnerable, Pinochet could revive Operation Condor with the goal of propping up friendly right-wing regimes in neighboring countries. In our timeline, Operation Condor had been a cooperative operation which allowed the South American regimes to coordinate efforts against left-wing militant organizations and figures, and in this revived form could constitute the basis of a new military pact with the potentially sympathetic regime of Fujimori in Peru, with efforts at promoting like-minded leadership in the states of Argentina and Bolivia. Economically, liberalization and privatization would continue, further bolstering the Chilean economy, but also widening the wealth gap within the country, and furthering Pinochet's vision of national power being in the hands of an elite segment of the population comprised of the proprietary and military class. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Chile would likely become the target of increased antagonism by the United States for its refusal to democratize and what would be perceived as its efforts to spread anti-democratic ideals across South America. If Chile continued to resist Western calls for democratization, this could lead to the breakout of a proxy war between Chile and a country more in line with the United States, like say Argentina, over a historic territorial dispute such as the Beagle conflict, all with the intention of weakening Chile and creating the conditions for a change of regime. If the US were to adopt a less extreme approach, it could very well just strangle Chile out economically, as Chile's free market and free trade system would have left it dependent upon the Western-led economic world order, Chile's economy being easily disrupted by sanctions and embargoes. Ironically, Chile may find an unexpected ally in China, who itself by this point would have embraced a combination of authoritarian state control and capitalism, producing what some today call party-state capitalism or socialism with Chinese characteristics. As American pressure on Chile intensified and reliance on Western markets became shaky, it's possible this Chinese economic model could begin to influence the economics of Chile, especially once Pinochet retired from office. This would perhaps be comparable to Russia's economic transition from the neoliberal economic policies of Boris Yeltsin to the more state-led capitalism of Vladimir Putin, which followed Russia's gradual break with the West. If this is the case, a Chile that remained under Pinochet's rule may have eventually found itself joining the ranks of anti-Western pariah states like Russia, China, and Iran, which might motivate greater investment in Chile by these countries, given the value of its strategic position in the Americas. But what do you think? What might have happened had Pinochet never stepped down? Let us know in the comments below. The US of Z thanks you for watching. Mr. Z, out.